Hope you enjoyed the first part of our session today with Gill. I'm now pleased to welcome Rebekah Tolley-Georgiou. Rebekah is an award-winning filmmaker and visual sound artist, an educator and a curator. She is currently the Society of Scottish Artists Satellite Coordinator for the Scottish Borders, and she has a background in producing and co-authoring critically acclaimed feature documentaries. Her work has been showcased at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and at the ICA in London. And her artistic endeavours extend way beyond film as well, with installation works exhibited at renowned institutions. She recently became an Amazon best-selling author for her contribution to Activate Your Life Volume 4, where she delves into the essence of creativity and the importance of intuitive connections in innovation, which is, interestingly enough, something we were just talking about a couple of seconds before we came back on. So, Rebekah... I'm sorry?
The title again?
The title?
Yes.
Of the book, yes. It's Activate Your Life Volume 4.
Activate Your Life Volume 4. Was there a 1, 2, 3?
There was indeed.
But the best one's 4.
It's the latest one.
Okay. And as you can see here, Gill and Rebekah's recent accolades include winning the Society of Scottish Artists Past President Prize 2023 for their collaborative piece Sotto Voce, which is just behind Gill's head there. So, Rebekah, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I wonder if I could ask you just to talk a little bit about your own work style and influences.
Blimey. Okay.
Take them one at a time.
Okay, so yes, as we were discussing earlier, so I met Gill on undergraduate in Cheltenham. I actually started life as a painter. Quickly decided I wasn't a painter, and then I moved over into the printmaking department. And then I've always said I have a very low boredom threshold. So then I started to work around in other mediums, and I ended up in the photography department, and then I started experimental film, and so I just kind of dipped my toe into everything, and then I quickly realised that I just enjoyed working in different mediums and in different ways, and that I was feeling pressure to pin myself down into one, but actually my tutors at the time in the printmaking department actually just sort of said to me, look, as long as you're working, just carry on. Just carry on, because I would quite often disappear off into the dark rooms and things like that. So they were just quite happy that I just get on with it, really. So my show was a multidisciplinary show, and then I ended up much later. Worked in photography for a long time, and then I was actually working in a studio. It wasn't a high street studio, we were working for advertising agencies, but it was just before the cusp of the digital revolution, so I didn't have Photoshop to work with. So I was actually introducing old Victorian processes, which advertisers loved, because you see a lot of it now. Actually, there's been a real return to cyanotype work you see everywhere, but I was actually working with all of that in the sort of mid-90s. As I say, advertising agencies really liked that because it was something different. And then I ended up working in film. So I've just enjoyed a very multidisciplinary approach always, and I think it's just whatever I choose to do is just where I'm at that particular moment. So it's never one thing over another. It's just, well, where are my thought processes taking me right now? And sometimes it's with sonic work, and sometimes it's with film-based work, and obviously at the moment we've been collaborating on visual narratives. So, yeah.
Just talk to us a little bit about cyanotypes, then. What is a cyanotype?
Oh goodness me! Right, okay. So it's an old Victorian process, and it's using salts, etc. It creates, at the end of the day, what you get is this beautifully rich almost teal-coloured image. So, as I say, there's a lot of artists working with that now. It's become a thing. and it wasn't a thing when I was working with it. And I was actually, because we were in Cheltenham, actually, the Royal Photographic Society was actually based in Bath then, which had been its home for a very long time, not since its inception, but it had been there for a very long time. So there was a thing at the time where photographers were going into the archives and pulling out these old recipes. And I knew for a long time, I knew Paul Caffell, who pulled out the recipe for platinum printing out of that archive and became hugely successful in that field, and his son Max now carries on that. But so he was working with the likes of Linda McCartney and David Bailey and all those people. Wow. Yeah. So I've always been curious. I think that's the thing that's led all of my processes, is curiosity. I have this intense curiosity about everything, and I'm always wanting to upskill and research and all of that. So I'm a research hound.
And delving archives.
I love delving in archives, is right. Yeah. That's a departure point for a lot of my work is archive.
So if you're in a restaurant and someone says, "Don't touch that plate, it's hot," you're the one that goes, "Ow!"
Oh, totally. Totally.
I just want to pick up on one of the points that you were making there, and it's one around photography initially, and this will bring us on to a further feature of our conversation, which I want to get into with both of you. But it's around perception. Now, when it comes to photography, it's almost it's similar to a phrase in economics in some ways. I think there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and I think there's something similar that potentially applies to photography, because what you're getting there is a particular moment in time. And obviously with digital photography these days, the ability to manipulate is on a quantum scale, and I use that word advisedly because we'll come back to that. Yes. But in traditional photography, unless you're able to, even when you're capturing something in the moment, you're capturing something that or a lot of the time is potentially been staged in some kind of way.
Oh, of course.
So when you were particularly focusing on your own photography outside of commercial work, what was there any particular style, theme, object that you were trying to capture or convey through this medium?
I guess, I fell into the realm of fine art photography, I guess you would say. And again, I've always been interested in archives, so I took a lot of my departure point from early photography. I've always been interested in that, that the moment, the punctum, as it's called, that moment, because it is always out of context. I think one of the examples I have used for a long time is that image Robert Capa took in the Spanish Civil War of the man falling backwards, and it's supposedly he's been shot, and it's that moment where he's falling towards the ground. But there's always been was that actually what happened? If you expanded that screen out, what would have been the wider narrative? So it's always circumspective, like what we actually bring, the observer and the observed. What are people bringing as the observer to something, a piece of art, any piece of art? They're bringing all of themselves to that process. So I've always been interested in that. But in terms of photography, I to this day I understand how it works, of course, but I'm still blown away by it, and the very mere fact that we can take these moments in time to me is still magical, even with the advent of digital. So that the old adage of like the camera never lies. Well, of course it's always lied. It's always lied. It's always been manipulated. Remember the fairies of Versailles?
Oh, absolutely.
There's always been manipulation. So of course it's entered a whole new realm now, which I find fascinating, and I'm working in that area. I'm curating something in that area at the moment, and I do find it really fascinating still to this day. I'll never get tired of it.
So if we were to, and this is probably a completely unfair question, so I'll ask it anyway. So if we were to put your approach to photography on a scale from, let's say, Nan Golding, in terms of almost real life reportage, up to the very refined portraiture of Annie Leibovitz. Where would Rebekah Tolley-Georgiou fit on that scale?
Oh, blimey, that's a big question. I don't know how to answer that one, because I think my work's kind of spun off in different directions depending on where I am. So I almost don't like to box myself in, and this is another reason why I like working in a multidisciplinary way. It's like I don't like to box myself into a particular style of working. I've worked on radio pieces, as you was talking about earlier, installation pieces, durational films, but then documentary features. So there's different approaches to things. I mean, I inherently, I suppose I do. I think the recurring theme is I do work a lot with archive, and I enjoy that traversing time and also dialogue with it. For instance, it could be with old photographic plates that we'll never know who the photographers were. They'll always remain anonymous, but I feel like there's a dialogue. I'm having a dialogue with them, and also bringing and celebrating their work and bringing it out into the light again. So that's probably a recurring theme. I would say archive, but in terms of narrowing down and placing myself within, I don't know if I could do that actually. You'd more question.
Skip between different phases, different periods, depending on what maybe overarching theme was interesting
absolutely. You. I've worked a lot in socially engaged practice, so I've worked in communities, and you just bring a different approach to the work that you're doing, and ultimately it's exploratory. I always feel like I'm experimenting. I know we all do as artists, but I feel like I'm in a laboratory always. I'm in my own laboratory always, so I'm kind of figuring things out and asking myself questions, and sometimes no one's more surprised at the result than me.
I think that self-criticism, that self-interrogation often produces the best kinds of art. Just on the point about archive, something that I'd like to recommend to anybody who gets the opportunity to go to Berlin. My wife and I were there fairly recently, and we went to the Bauhaus Archive. The Bauhaus Archive, the actual building, is shut for renovations, but they have a small corner of a shop in the centre of Berlin, and it has this screened off room. Within the room there's a projector screen, which is kind of to your point, and there's a console. You can choose different photos that come in and out of this great multitude of photos you can see on this big projector screen, and then it gives you a little bit more information about that particular piece. So what's interesting for me, partly to your point, is not just the archive or the fact that it is an archive, but that archive has been curated. Those pieces will have been selected. The way in which you interact with that archive has also been curated as well. There's a degree of agency behind it, much as there's a degree of editorial behind reality TV shows, behind news shows, etc. So and I think that's interesting, the way that you approach maybe an archive that maybe you've taken, I don't know which that archive might be, but would you say that you find an archive of some sort? I appreciate I'm being a bit general here. You find an archive of some sort, you dive in, and then an idea suggests itself to you, which you can then express further through whichever media you choose? Or is there more agency on your part? You've come up with some kind of concept, there's something that's interesting you, maybe commissioned for something, you go, right, okay, I'm interested in this, let's have a look and see where the past research has gone.
I think it's a bit of both, really. I mean, the piece, for instance, the piece that I did at Marchmont, when we were at Marchmont, I asked to see the ledgers for the house. So the ledgers they have are largely from 1818, and there's just lists upon lists of people working on the estates by name or description. Man and woman cleaning the bothy, boy herding crows, things like that. So it's this incredible list, and you think, well, these people, whether they're named or unnamed, these people ran this massive estate, and they're never the people that are talked about. It's only the people, it's the architects or the families, who own these great piles, and so I did a sound piece, and in part of that sound piece, I just had this girl talking the ledgers and bringing them out of the ledgers, just talking talking exactly what was in those ledgers, and naming these people, just naming them. So it was just about to celebrate those people that they're hidden away in these massive leather volumes, and
So how does that work in practice with a sound installation? Point number one. Point number two, that's what you're trying to bring out. How is it received by the person who's experiencing it? Does this tend to be maybe a piece of film or some pictures with some headphones, or how does this work?
Well, in terms of that piece, I made a durational film which was literally just 3 shots, 3 very long shots, and then I had this sound piece which was a collage, and it was about this thing about time folding over on itself. So you have the March one of today, and you have all these creative makers. So you're listening to that, and then you're listening to the sounds of the house. So I was in the big house and listening to all that creaking, and listening to all of those sounds of clocks and people walking along creaky floorboards and whatever. So it was just telling this story of this place, but you get that sense of literally time folding in on itself and over itself, and then this girl just talking these names of these people on this estate. And so we had very large speakers in the beautiful squash court gallery up there, which was actually literally had the last bit of paint put on it because they just renovated it. So I was so lucky because I was the first person in there. So these beautiful pristine white wall, this beautiful gallery. So so that the sound filled the space. It really filled the space, and then people could see the film. And then I had some just static visual pieces on the wall. So it was received really well. Really, really well, and people really sat with it and looked and listened, and it was received really well.
I think that's really satisfying when you create a piece that's immersive and that your audience, your viewers can interact with, and you can see and hear the interactions that they're making, because that almost becomes a different experience. It becomes a different piece of art in itself. But I want to take you back to doing this, I'm dreadful, but I want to take you back to one of the points that you were just making there, because that builds on a conversation we were having shortly before we started this afternoon, and that was around the nature, a little bit around the nature of time and time folding and narratives, and not just one narrative, but multiple narratives, which is one of the things I hope I'm getting you right when saying that you're trying to convey in that particular piece, and no doubt in other pieces as well. And I appreciate that this is a talk on art. We're now going to go into physics, but I promise you only very, very briefly. So very, very briefly, very easy. Talk to me about quantum narratives. First, I'd like you to explain the concept of quantum physics. Only very briefly.
Really want me to explain that?
It's okay, I'll do it.
That's okay.
No, just the concept of how you're incorporating quantum state. So just please explain what a quantum state is and how that incorporates into your story.
Okay, so it's the idea that at a subatomic level, at the what is observed, the observer is observing a subatomic particle, and the very act of observing it changes. It knows it's being observed.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. but in that sense, it's actually, we're doing it all the time when we are an artist, and then we are handing work over, releasing it into the world, and then people come to it and experience it. So it is changed by the very act of observation, because everyone's bringing their own self, their own personal life experiences, everything whether they're conscious of it or not, they're bringing everything to that act of observation of what they're looking at. And they may only briefly glance at it, or they may spend some time with it. So it does become change. So, you know, when we make a piece of work together, we have we're bringing our own everything to it. And we will invariably see it slightly differently.
Yeah.
But then when somebody else is looking at this work, they're bringing their own narratives to it as well. So, I mean, but that's the great thing about art, is that you can, you know, and I think where artwork succeeds, when it really succeeds, is that people will come back to it, keep coming back to it, and it maybe challenges them to think differently, or see other things, or hear other things, or, you know, it's that just that sort of observation and, you know, looking at something, experiencing it, feeling it, however it's perceived, you know, because for some people, I mean, I don't mind saying, I had a piece of work in an art fair recently, and it made a woman cry. It made her just cry, and she was just like going, and that's an incredible thing as an artist to invoke something like that in somebody, because they're just bringing themselves to it, so it's sparking something in them. So, you know, that's a huge compliment. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate it's not the easiest of the topics to go through, and I have actually studied quantum physics a very long time ago. But I think that the key point that I want to draw out here is the last one that you were making there, that art changes the observer and the observer changes the art, that we all bring our own frame of reference to a piece of art, no matter what format that piece of art is in, whether it's musical, whether it's three-dimensional, whether it's a drawing. It's our own frame of reference that we then overlay onto it. Just come back to you, Gill, for a second. The piece of art that I own by Gill, it resonated with me because it looks like how I imagined some favourite female characters from books I used to read when I was a kid. I looked at it and I recognised it. Now, Gill, when she was creating that, actually didn't know me, and nor would she know what books I've written, nor why I was remembering kids' books instead of reading something more grown up. But in any case, I was putting my own frame of reference onto it, and so the art changes the observer, and the observer changes the art. And that also, I think, Rebekah, talks to your point around, in some ways, multiple narratives. So, for instance, within your audio work, where you're drawing in different elements of the Marchmont House there that you were talking about from different time periods, then what you've actually got is narrative upon narrative upon narrative superimposed upon each other. So they form in some ways a gestalt whole, but also there's these individual pieces from different times as well.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to ask you now, and I'm really not going to get more complex, I'm going to try not to, mainly for my sake as well as everybody else's. But thinking about that, is that, would you say that the concept of maybe multiple narratives, maybe competing narratives is a thread that runs through other pieces of your work?
Yeah, I think so. I think if I look at my body of work overall, I think I would say that. And I also think, you know, thinking about inspirations in terms of other creators, I'll say creators, that I can draw parallels. So, you know, I very much like the work of Peter Greenaway. You know, Peter Greenaway is a filmmaker, artist, trained. David Lynch is a filmmaker, artist, trained, but they all deal with multiple narratives and also, you know, bending time and all that kind of thing. And I also, one of my kind of long-standing inspiration, and again, it's another film reference, is Powell and Pressburger. So for any of you of a certain age, the filmmakers who were probably at the height of their powers in the 1940s, they did the Red Shoes, they made the Red Shoes, Black Narcissus, Matter of Life and Death is probably one of my favourite films. But they were visually stunning work, but they were really playing around with narrative, I mean really unconventional narrative forms, which was obviously very different for the time that they were made in, but beautiful work. This incredible cinematography by Jack Cardiff, you know, a real hero of mine. And but yeah, I think I've always really been interested in people that play around with those structures and multiple narrative threads and ways of telling stories that aren't just that kind of linear kind of track.
Okay, and give us a couple of examples then of pieces of your work. And you've mentioned the Marchment piece. What other pieces of work have you done that embrace that multiple narrative structure?
Well, I suppose I would pull out the documentary that I co-authored in came out in 2013, which was a feature documentary called We Went to War. I was lucky enough to work for almost a decade with the filmmaker Michael Grigsby, who was, and this is a quote from the BFI, one of the giants of British documentary filmmaking in this country. He had a 60-year career in filmmaking. Wow. The only surviving footage of the Beatles playing the Cavern was his. That was his early doors, and he was the most extraordinary filmmaker, gifted filmmaker. He was like a free-form jazz artist as a filmmaker, I would say. He was not about conventional narrative at all, really wasn't. So I learned a huge amount from him, but I encouraged him to revisit a film that he made in 1970, which is a film called I Was a Soldier, and it was about 3 Vietnam veterans coming home from war, and nobody in 1970 was talking about soldiers coming home from war. It was not a concept that was on anybody's minds, and he shone a light on that. The film was successful but banned in America, too politically sensitive, and 40 years later I said I really think we should revisit this story, and we did. So we found the original protagonists, 3 guys, well 2 actually, the third had passed, but we told his story through his wife and daughter. So there was that, all within that we were kind of folding into that the narrative from 1970, because my initial response when I first saw the film, I asked Michael, can I watch that film that you made, 1970? And my response to that when I finished watching it was, I want to know what happened to them after you left. Where, you know, because this is like the greater part of their lives lived. If they're still alive, what happened? What was that arc of their lives because of that extreme experience in Vietnam? So we made the film, and it's used by one of the world's leading post-traumatic stress disorder professors uses it as a teaching aid.
Good. Well done.
So, yeah.
Can I just interject a little bit about the film? We Went to War, it's about a very difficult subject, but it is so beautiful, and that's Rebekah's influence in that. So beautiful and so poetic, and it has...
It's a war film with no war in it.
Yeah, but it's got Rebekah's aesthetic running all the way through it, so it's a stunning film.
Well, one of the questions I was going to ask you was, I already asked Rebekah about her impressions of your work and why she liked your work. Let's turn the tables.
Well, it's... I've always been impressed by Rebekah throughout her career because she's always learning new skills and taking those into her work. So she has worked across film, radio, photography, all of that. All of it has her signature running through it. It's so she said I was technically able. She can do things I could never do. All of her work is always beautiful and poetic, always. So I don't know.
Reach of the span of
I think
that's why it's been such an honour to work with her, because you were saying this earlier, when we work together, we are better than the some of the parts, you know, we bring the best of each other's work to the joint pieces, I think.
Yeah, and it's not, you know, it's not a given. You know, it's not a given that when you work with people that it can be a happy thing to do.
No.
Certainly had that experience.
Yeah.
But with you, it is. It's like it's easy.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable. Well, we look forward to it, don't we? It's
yeah,
just
we
like,
do. It's
we shut the world out, and then we're in the space of doing it, and that's a real, and it is a real privilege.
And the ideas, there is a cross. So I don't see these pieces as mine with Rebekah. They are they're a different thing. They're not a bit of me and a bit of her. They are us. But there are a lot of crossovers. So the thing of narrative, that word narrative has come up a lot during the my own, what Rebekah would be saying on her own. But there are threads of both our work and
our DNA is in
Yeah. So all the crossovers are in these pieces.
One of the things that I love about doing these kinds of conversations, these kind of interviews, is having guests like these who just feed me the lines, and I can because this leads us neatly into the conversation we're going to have about your joint work together. And one of the things that I'm curious about lots of stuff, but one of the things I'm particularly curious about is elements of symbolism within your joint pieces. So Gill, I'm going to ask you first, and then Rebekah, I'll ask you to answer the same question. So what are you trying to convey through, well, what is the symbolism, first of all, that you'd like to pick out, and what are you trying to convey?
Well, there are lots of things in both of these. There are lots of elements in both of them. We try not to be too like, this is the story, this is what we're trying to say. We are choosing universal symbols. In this one, there are symbols of alchemy in there, because I was, the piece of work that Rob has was from a series called Alchemy, because I was combining elemental materials in those metals and waxes in those pieces. And so those alchemical symbols are in here that they have meaning, but that meaning is elusive and difficult to pinpoint. So we sort of point at things and then leave it to you.
I think there's a lot about transformation, transcendence.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of that intersection of the human condition but spirituality. I wouldn't say, I know you touched on I know it's not religion, but religious themes.
Yeah.
But I don't use that word. I think I'm interested in spirituality in the sense of who we are in a much bigger sense of who we are and where we've come from and where we're going, and I think there's a lot of that. So it's like working between the planes. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense even. So I mean, for instance, this piece here. So some of the elements in this. So that those sort of sparks coming away from her, that's actually from an old Victorian plate negative, which was electrical experiments. So and here on her head, all of those white sort of elements are actual star clusters that were photographed in the 1880s. So she's literally made of stars, this girl. And so I think that's an alchemy. There's an alchemy in what we do. It's alchemy. Yeah, we're kind of just we're taking from so many different.
And this again is Rebekah's love of archives and collecting things. She has an amazing collection of all sorts of things. You should see her house full of amazing treasures. But she has a collection of Victorian glass plate negatives.
Oh, wow.
And that's where
well,
a lot of these interesting things come
so
from.
that and up into the 20th century, I have a huge fascination with all things space related as well, and I have actually worked with the Russian Space Agency. One of my previous.
She keeps throwing it all the time. It's
project.
You can't just drop that there. What was the program that you were working with?
I worked on a film. It was one of the most bonkers projects I've ever been involved in. So I had to. I filmed the head of the Russian Space Agency first off in Paris, Viktor Blagov, who actually worked on Gagarin's flight. So he literally spanned the history of Russian space flight, and was head of the agency. So I filmed him first in Paris, him and his team, and then in Moscow. So went to Moscow last year, which was the most bonkers trip I've ever been on in my entire life. And but fascinating. But I've always been fascinated by all things space and space related. So there's all those things kind of creep in.
Good. So what made you? I appreciate it's archival. Was there a specific desire to pick that particular plate, those particular stars, or is it just I know I want something that has a history to it?
I just know. I inherently know. When I approach something, I'll go, that's what I need. I just know. I just know what it is that I need. I can just look at it. Sometimes it takes time to begin. Sometimes it takes time to begin, and then once I've just got a spark of something, that's it. I'm off. That's it. I'm off. You know that, don't you?
Mm-hmm. I think that's that's the fun part about doing research. You find the rabbit hole and then go straight down.
I'm totally off down rabbit holes. Yeah.
So I've got one more question for you both, but before I do that, I'd like to open this up to the audience, if you don't mind. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have two captive artists. We're not releasing them until you ask at least one question.
Yeah, cool.
Who wants to go first?
Ask us something.
I've got two questions.
Two's good.
Are you going to talk about how you actually work together? The practicalities?
Actually, that would be good, wouldn't it?
I don't know if that comes later, but the other question was Jill, I was fascinated by saying you put on your graphite and you take off, because there is a sculptural feel, but then you put wax on, beeswax.
Yes.
And how does that normally affect the graphite? You do it with liquid, or you just rub
So
it on?
it's beeswax that's been melted with a little bit of turpentine.
Right.
It's bleached beeswax, and so you get it brushed on with it's like a paste, and you quite often it leaves the brush marks behind, but that's not the end layer. So I'll quite often lift it off with a cloth or a rubber or whatever. Put more pencil in,
Right.
another layer of beeswax, another layer of so it's layers.
So you're
and
laying it
it's,
with the graphite up and
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
Right.
and rubbing off and putting on. So it's layering. Yeah.
So the whole thing is quite sculptural.
Yes,
Yes.
it is. Yes.
Yes. Just
Yes.
matter.
Yes. Yes. For now. Until I put little nooks in them, and then it becomes 3D again.
I think in terms of the pieces that we work on.
Uh-huh.
So with that one, we started with a drawing, your drawing.
Yes.
And
That
then
was the starting point
that
for
was
that
the starting point, and then I worked. So then I took that, and then I worked over that with the elements.
one.
And then slightly differently with that one, I started with the figure, but you the face is all yours.
Yeah.
The face is all yours. And then, so it's just building things up in layers, so we go back and forward. And then we come together
At the end.
to literally...
Both working on it around the table with paints, ink, gold leaf. I actually painted her face in bronze, using bronze powder mixed with beeswax. So, and then there's gold leaf and there's
The black is black.
the black is black and
Reflective.
Klein blue. There's iridescent inks.
Mhm.
So that's the lovely bit. Well, it's all lovely, but at the end when we are actually huddled around the table together.
What's lovely with these pieces, because we both kind of, as a process of making them, we've had them in each other's houses.
Yes.
And what's fascinating, because of course you're seeing them in a particular light and put up in a particular way, but they really change with the light throughout the day, and even in the evening. They really, really just change.
She looks magnificent here because she's getting the light on her in a certain way, so the gold just goes.
Yeah, but she does do that on like when I sort of put her up, but she's done that. But they literally do, depending on the time of day, they really just do change, and it's extraordinary to watch that really, and that's it's really beautiful because they don't just stay the same. They kind of dance with the light really.
Yeah.
Hello, there's one. Yeah.
Just looking at the two pieces quite different. Is there anything that you can tell us about over what period of time
Yes.
this?
Yeah. Well, that one was 3 months. That took 3 months, and that probably took about a month and a half. That one. Yeah.
And when you say that, is that sort of pretty full time doing it, or is it you come and go between that and something else?
Come and go. So, but you could also say it took 40 years. You know,
It took 40 years.
It took 40 years. So it's.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a pretty intense. You know, we have intensive. You know, and I mean I think there's a point where I was.
Beforehand
I think we're working on that, and then the nice thing is as well. So like we worked on it. There was one day when we worked on it really intensively, and then you went home, and then I just carried on.
Yeah.
Because we were just like, I trust you just to carry on.
Yeah.
So I was doing it till 4 in the morning. I think I just couldn't tear myself off it, so I just kept going. But we trust each other enough to just say, right, I'm going to do. Okay, you're going to do that. Okay, I'll do that.
So just on that point, if I can ask you, is the process when you're working in this joint very different from the process when you're working on the very different?
Yes. Yes. It is. It is, and you have to let it go. So I'll do a bit, and then I have to let it go, which is, you are trusting it to another, and likewise with Rebekah, she'll do something. She lets it go. So it's very different.
Only if you know each other that well.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a beautiful thing.
We're all talking about we're all curious, I think, about how you've done it. And I was thinking about the creative process. Like jazz.
Yeah.
One person will listen to a melody and then work on that.
That's right.
Is that with you? The same sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think I've always loved the idea of working in that way. I think a lot of what we do is that freeform jazz style. So yeah, I think
it's very intuitive. If that's the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's
and
very.
I hate to use that word, but it is quite an organic process. I hate to use that word, but it does sum it up really. And it feels
just a couple of follow-up questions. So do you have something envisioned before you start? Is it more of the layering as you go, or do you layer over the sketches that you have?
We don't have a fixed idea when we start. No.
It kind of just it finds itself.
Yeah.
Actually, it finds itself.
In that case, when do you know when to stop?
The same as you would if it was a piece of your own work.
Yeah.
You just go. That's it.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm just going to do that as well, and you think it's done, but maybe that as well.
Sometimes it's a deadline.
Sometimes it's a deadline. Deadline actually. Yeah.
So, well, we decided. So basically, we did the first piece last year, and then we decided that because this year was 40 years of us knowing each other, that we like the idea of creating 12 pieces of work this year.
We're almost on schedule.
We're almost on schedule, yes. We are actually. Yeah, so there's more to come.
Yes.
More to come this year.
So, any more from the audience? No? Okay, well, in that case, I'm just going to ask one more question of you guys, and then we'll wrap. And it's more of a light-hearted one. I want to know what's on your playlist. You said you've been dancing around the table when creating these works.
God damn it, what a question. God, well, you're going to say the same thing. Mine's really eclectic. Really eclectic. And sometimes it's not music, sometimes it's just sound.
Mm-hmm.
I like sound.
Yep.
Sometimes it's things from when we were at art college together, sometimes it's things from now. You know, so things like the Cocteau Twins from when we were art student days.
Yeah, it just depends. And I'm very much somebody who loves discovering new work, new pieces, whether it's artwork or music or anything.
Brian Eno is a big favourite of Rebekah's, and she was almost going to meet him today.
Oh, I was almost going to meet him tonight. Oh.
But what happened instead?
I would have blown me out for Brian Eno.
No.
Why are you not? You can't leave that there. Why are you not meeting Brian Eno? And how did this come about?
I can't say very much, but okay. So I'm curating something at the moment. So somebody who's involved with Brian Eno artist-wise is in my show.
Excellent. So David Byrne then? Not David Byrne.
No, but anyway. But it's somebody who's just created a 168-hour generative film which never plays the same twice on the life and music of Brian Eno.
Wow, okay.
And the world Rebekah lives in.
It's premiering. Well, it had its premiere. It was made for the Venice Biennale Musica.
Yep.
Premiered in Sundance Festival last year, and it's premiering. It has its London premiere at the Barbican tonight.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you for being here. Any more questions before we wrap up?
Just the name of your book again, I've forgotten it.
Oh, Activate Your Life, Volume 4.
Great.
And mine's on the playful connections, creativity. So there's this chapter each. So there's 25 contributors to the book. So.
I think
really interesting, actually. They're really interesting chapters, if I say so myself.
Yeah, I'm interested in creativity. So
there's some really interesting things in there.
Yeah.
So really, these are from writers around the world. So I highly recommend.
Great, thank you. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, it just remains to say thank you to our guests today, Gill Walton and Rebekah Tolley-Georgiou. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. I do have to say on behalf of us and the gallery, thank you for coming here. These works are for sale if you're interested. If you do want to talk to any of us, well, we have to do that. Yeah, come on. They're good pieces. I know.
Yeah.
No, they are good. In all seriousness, we are a commercial gallery. All the artwork around you that you see is available for sale. If you have any questions, please do come and talk to us. But more importantly, you have Gill here, you have Rebekah here. If you'd like to talk to them after we finish here today in a couple of minutes' time, please do. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.